At 30 minutes after 3, as I mentioned, a naturopath who treated a woman for 18 months with an invasive cancer that ate through her skull has been heavily criticised for not referring the matter to doctors. Tohoro iridologist Ruth Nelson may face Human Rights Tribunal action over her treatment of Yvonne Main, who sought treatment for what she believed was a cyst on her head in 2008. Mrs. Nelson carried out a variety of natural health treatments over the next 18 months as the invasive cancer grew to almost 11 centimetres in size. By the time Mrs. May went to see a doctor in late 2009, the cancer had eaten into her skull and exposed her brain. She received major surgery, having part of her skull removed, but she died a year later. And joining us now, Professor Shaun Holt, welcome to the program.
Yeah, good afternoon, Andrew.
So what are the protocols here? What is that line between when those who are treating in a natural medicine capacity should, in fact, refer the matter to other medical authorities?
Well, I mean, the vast majority of complementary practitioners out there shouldn't be treating anything. They haven't got any qualifications in a recognised health at all. And there are many, many people out there. So the particular person in question shouldn't have been treating anyone for anything. She was an iridologist. This is a crazy practice whereby you can treat people by having a look at what you can see in their eyes. And so, unfortunately, this is a terrible case, but it's not unusual.
But there are plenty of people who do subscribe to this alternative medicine, and you can't really, I mean, it's a free country. I mean, people are able to go and seek whatever advice that they choose to do. Then I suppose it's more a matter of trying to manage it than trying to ban them, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a free country and people can do whatever they want. Absolutely agree with that. But what I'm trying to do is educate people. You know, some complementary therapists, do offer useful services, whereas some very rarely do. So, seeing an iridologist would be an example of a bad one. We don't want laws and banning people because then it just goes underground. Also, I don't think we want regulations because that gives credibility to people who perhaps don't deserve it. What I'd like to see in this case is the full use of the law. If you make fraudulent claims, that should be against the law. If you harm someone or contribute to the death, that should be against the law as well.
Just explain what an iridologist is supposedly claiming to be able to do.
Yeah, they supposedly can look in the eyes and diagnose illnesses, and then they'll recommend certain natural products. Now, like a lot of these pseudo-scientific claims, there's a hint of truth in there, in that there's a couple of medical conditions like high cholesterol or high copper levels that you can actually see in the eyes, but they take it far further, and they claim they can diagnose most things by looking in the eyes.
Do you have any idea of what percentage of people are or do subscribe to these sort of complementary health approaches?
No, I mean, in terms of taking a product, for example, about 2/3 of New Zealanders will take some product or see some sort of therapist, but that doesn't include things like multivitamins and fish oil. However, people with cancer, like in this case, or other serious conditions, the vast majority will go and see complementary therapists, or at least they'll have a good look at it. And there are some people out there who are unscrupulous, or they're just totally misguided and will give people bad advice.
Is there any way that people can approach this? Because if they do have an inclination towards this type of treatment, what you're saying is that perhaps you should do both. You should look at the complementary side, but also look at the medical side and make sure that the two of them are running in tandem.
Sure. I mean, I'm biased, but I've written a book on the subject for people in exactly this position, and I give a lot of talks, around 50 a year, to patient groups and health professionals advising which are the more sensible complementary therapies, which one can help with symptoms and quality of life. And there are around 30 of those. So I agree, there's no point saying don't use any of these because the vast majority are useless. That's not helpful because a lot of people want to do whatever they can, and I can certainly understand that. What I'm saying is, try and use the more sensible ones and get some good advice.
Obviously, at certain points in their lives too, patients are particularly vulnerable, as you say, in a cancer situation, presumably where there may not be a good long-term prognosis. Then people are always able to, or more inclined perhaps, to be steered towards thinking that there might be, that X cure out there, and therefore they will try those. Does that tend to be, from your experience, what hers, where people are perhaps a little bit more vulnerable?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, and that makes sense. If me or you had some sort of terrible illness, I'm sure we'd want to do every single thing possible. So I certainly understand that. The problem, though, is that if you go to some really really, really disappointingly bad practitioners, like in this case, not only will you get bad advice or dangerous advice, even fatal advice, but they will often tell you not to go and see your doctor, and they'll give you all sorts of tales about how doctors will make you worse, and as in this case, will try and treat it on their own, and hence make it much more worse.
Obviously, medical professionals are held to a much higher standard than those in the natural or complementary medicines standard, I imagine. So there's two different sets of rules here?
Yes, there is, and quite rightly so. Doctors have very high standards, and which they have to maintain, and in natural health, of course, that isn't the case. However, I don't think the answer is to regulate natural health. It'd be like, say, regulating psychics. You know, you could do that, but then that sort of implies that psychics actually do anything anyway. So, you know, my simple suggestion will be, let's use the law. If people are out there saying they can cure cancer when they can't, that's a fraudulent claim. Prosecute for that. In this case, I see that the lady is going to be referred to the director of proceedings for possible prosecution, and I certainly hope that occurs. There was a famous case in Sydney a couple of years ago where a homeopath was treating a baby for eczema, and the baby died. I mean, that's so unusual for a baby to die of eczema, and the person was charged with manslaughter and jailed, and rightly so.
Do you think that those operating in the complementary sector should be required to present patients with some sort of a form that outlines, you know, some of these specifics, so that there is some degree of standardisation of the messages that are being conveyed to patients? Do you think that would be one form of useful regulation, perhaps?
I'm not sure if that would help too much, but what I'm trying to do is educate people. So, you know, if no one went to see an iridologist anyway, they'd soon go out of business, and that'd be my hope, and same for homeopaths. But at the very least, some of them will, when it's clearly a serious case, refer to a doctor. So not all will try and treat on, as in this case. But there are lots of cases now in medicine. Cases often get referred to the Health and Disability Commissioner, but there's no real formal collection mechanism for harm from complementary therapists. And so it's highly likely that there are many more cases out there. I was speaking at the local hospice a few weeks ago to the staff there, and they tell me they see dozens of cases like this, where people refuse conventional treatment and their complementary therapist is encouraging them to do so.
Very much appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today, speaking to Professor Shaun Holt, a medical researcher at Victoria University Wellington, expert on complementary